Banned. Not for cheating, not for being dangerous, but for being too good. In 1990, Nissan unleashed a car so dominant that racing organizations had no choice but to ask, what do you do when one car threatens to destroy an entire sport? The answer was simple. You kill it. February 1989, Tokyo. Nissan pulls the cover off a car that looks like it was designed to start fights. The R32 GT-R. Wide, aggressive, menacing, with those iconic four-round taillights glowing like eyes of something that shouldn't exist. But it wasn't the looks that made people nervous. It was what Nissan had hidden underneath. A twin turbocharged inline-six engine pumping out 280 horsepower. At least that's what the brochure said. Everyone knew it was lying. Dyno tests would later reveal closer to 330. A Tessa ETS all-wheel drive system. Advanced torque splitting technology that could send power wherever it was needed, whenever it was needed. And Super Hikus four-wheel steering. The rear wheels could turn independently, making the GT-R rotate through corners like it was reading the driver's mind. This wasn't just a sports car. This was a computer on wheels, a turbocharged video game boss with a license plate. Nissan had spent years developing this thing in secret, pouring money into technology that didn't even exist in Formula One yet. They weren't building a car to compete. They were building a car to dominate. And the racing world had no idea what was coming. May 1990, Spa-Francorchamps, Belgium. The R32 GT-R rolls up to one of the most brutal racetracks in the world for its international Group A racing debut. Group A was the pinnacle of touring car racing. Production-based cars modified for competition. Ford Sierra Cosworths, BMW M3s. These were proven winners with years of development and track dominance behind them. And here comes Nissan with a car nobody outside Japan had even heard of. The European teams weren't worried, they were amused. Another Japanese manufacturer trying to play with the big boys. How cute. Then the race started. The GT-R didn't just win, it disappeared. While the Sierras and the M3s battled for position, the Nissan was already half a lap ahead, carving through Eau Rouge like it was a highway on-ramp. The all-wheel drive system was putting power down where rear-wheel drive cars were spinning tires. The four-wheel steering was rotating the car through corners with surgical precision. The twin turbos were spooling up and launching the GT-R out of apexes like it had been shot from a cannon. Drivers who'd spent years mastering Spa were watching their mirrors in disbelief as the GT-R casually strolled past them on the outside of corners they thought were single file only. The Atessa system was doing something no other car could do. It was managing traction in real time. While rear-wheel drive cars had to choose between acceleration and control, the GT-R said yes to both. In the pits, engineers were checking their telemetry, wondering if their equipment was broken. The lap times didn't make sense. The GT-R was braking later, carrying more speed through corners, and accelerating earlier than physics should allow. By the time the checkered flag dropped, the GT-R had won by over a minute. A minute. In motorsport, that's not a victory. That's a humiliation. The podium celebration was awkward. The European team stood there stone-faced, forced to applaud a car that just made them look like amateurs in their own backyard. One driver was asked what it was like racing against the GT-R. His answer, like being in a knife fight with someone who brought a gun. And Nissan was just getting started. Spa was just the beginning. What happened next wasn't racing, it was an execution. Race after race, the GT-R showed up and turned competitions into parades. Brands Hatch, Donington Park, Bathurst, pole position, fastest lap, victory. Pole position, fastest lap, victory. Over and over and over again. In Japan, the GT-R was obliterating the domestic championship. 29 races, 29 wins. Not 29 out of 30, not 29 out of 35. 29 out of 29, perfect. At Mount Panorama in Australia, a track so dangerous it's nicknamed the Mountain, the GT-R didn't just win, it lapped the entire field. Cars that qualified second, third finished a lap down. Think about that. On a 6.2 kilometer circuit with elevation changes, blind corners, and walls that have claimed countless careers, the GT-R was so far ahead it completed an entire extra lap before everyone else crossed the line. The winning margin? Over 3 minutes ahead of second place. 3 minutes. That's enough time to change your oil. And it wasn't just winning, it was how it was winning. At Fuji Speedway, the GT-R set a lap record that wouldn't be broken for years. Not by next year's GT-R, not by improved versions. The 1990 car set a time that stood as an untouchable monument. At Suzuka, drivers reported that the GT-R was actually accelerating through corners where everyone else was braking. The four-wheel steering was allowing it to rotate mid-apex while still pulling power down through all four wheels. It was doing things that shouldn't be possible. Mark Skaife, one of Australia's most decorated touring car drivers, said it best. You could be the best driver in the world, in the best car that isn't a GT-R, and you'd still lose. Another competitor described racing against it as chasing a ghost that occasionally laps you just to remind you it's real. Commentators were running out of ways to describe dominance. Unstoppable, unbeatable, unfair. Fans started calling it Godzilla, not as a compliment, as a warning. Because in the original 1954 film, Godzilla wasn't a hero. It was a force of nature that destroyed everything in its path while humanity watched helplessly. And that's exactly what the R32 was doing to Group A racing. Competitors weren't even racing for first anymore. They were racing for second, the best of the rest. The who can lose to Nissan the slowest championship. Teams started developing GT-R strategy, which basically meant ignore the Nissan, focus on beating everyone else, and hope something breaks on the GT-R. Spoiler alert, nothing ever broke. TV ratings started dropping. Why tune in when you already know who's going to win? Sponsors were getting nervous. Who wants to pay millions to watch their team get embarrassed week after week? Ticket sales were declining. Watching a GT-R cruise to victory by 90 seconds wasn't exactly edge-of-your-seat entertainment. And in boardrooms across Europe, team principals were having the same conversation. Something had to change. Here's where things get ugly. When you can't beat someone on the track, you beat them in the rulebook. By 1992, the complaints were getting louder. Ford, BMW, Holden. Every manufacturer that wasn't Nissan was fuming in frustration. And they all had the same question. How is the GT-R this good? It had to be cheating, right? The power figures had to be illegal. The all-wheel drive system had to be against the regulations. The aerodynamics had to be hiding something. So they demanded inspections. Nissan welcomed them. Strip the car down, measure everything. Check the weight, the engine, the turbo boost, the suspension geometry. Go ahead. The inspectors found nothing. The GT-R was completely legal. Every component within regulation, every measurement within tolerance. It wasn't cheating, it was just better. And that made the other manufacturers even angrier. Because if Nissan wasn't breaking the rules, that meant one terrifying truth. They'd simply out-engineered everyone. The Atessa system, the RB26 engine, the four-wheel steering, these weren't loopholes. They were innovations that other manufacturers either couldn't figure out or were too cheap to develop. Ford had been building the Sierra Cosworth for years. Proven technology, rally-bred pedigree. But it was rear-wheel drive in a world where all-wheel drive had just changed the game. BMW's M3 was a precision instrument. Beautiful engineering. But it was also naturally aspirated, making maybe 300 horsepower, while the GT-R was hiding closer to 400. These weren't bad cars. They were great cars. They just weren't GT-Rs. Nissan had done their homework, built a better car, and now everyone else wanted the rules changed because they couldn't keep up. The politicking started immediately. Behind closed doors, team principals pressured racing officials. Sponsors threatened to pull funding. TV networks warned that viewership was collapsing. The Australian Touring Car Championship was practically brutal. Local hero Peter Brock, a 9-time Bathurst winner and national icon, watched his Holden Commodore get destroyed by the GT-R year after year. The Australian fans were furious. This was their race, their mountain, and some Japanese interloper was turning it into a joke. Pressure mounted on officials to level the playing field. Translation: nerf the GT-R. The message was clear: either control the GT-R or Group A racing dies. In 1993, the first restrictions arrived: weight penalties. The GT-R had to carry extra ballast, sandbags bolted to the chassis to slow it down. 50 kilograms at first, then 100, then 150. Nissan shrugged and kept winning. The engineers just recalibrated the suspension, adjusted the weight distribution, and carried on dominating. So they added more weight. The GT-R won again. Turbo boost restrictions came next. Limit the horsepower, cap the aggression, install mandatory air restrictors to choke the intake. Nissan's engineers just turned around, optimized the fuel mapping, improved the exhaust flow, made the car more efficient with less power. Still winning. Then came the tire restrictions. The GT-R had to run harder compound tires. Less grip, more sliding. Didn't matter. The four-wheel steering system compensated. The Atessa system adapted. Victory after victory after victory. It was like watching someone win a fist fight with one hand tied behind their back, so the referee ties their other hand, and they just start kicking instead. At one point, the GT-R was carrying so much ballast and running so many restrictions that it was essentially racing with a handicap equivalent to towing a small car. And it was still winning. The other teams weren't just losing, they were being humiliated by a car that was deliberately being held back. Officials were running out of ideas. They'd thrown everything at the GT-R short of making it run on 3 cylinders. By 1994, the regulatory body was out of options. They tried everything short of an outright ban, so they did exactly that. 1995, Group A racing officials gathered in a conference room and made a decision that would rewrite motorsport history. They didn't call it a ban, that would have been too obvious, too honest. Instead, they restructured the entire championship. Group A was being phased out in favor of a new format: Super Touring, a fresh start with fresh rules designed to create closer, more competitive racing. Translation: rules specifically written to exclude the GT-R. The new regulations were surgical in their precision. Two-wheel drive only, no all-wheel drive systems allowed. Naturally aspirated engines preferred, turbos heavily restricted. No active differentials, no four-wheel steering, no advanced electronics. Maximum engine displacement, 2.0 liters. The GT-R's RB26, 2.6 liters, illegal. Every single thing that made the GT-R dominant was suddenly against the rules. It wasn't a rule change, it was an assassination. And everyone knew it. One journalist wrote, "They didn't ban the GT-R, they just made it illegal to be a GT-R." Another called it the greatest compliment in motorsport history, when they have to rewrite the rulebook because you're too good. Nissan's response was diplomatic in public. Behind closed doors, they were furious. They'd spent millions developing the R32, years of engineering, countless hours of testing. They'd done everything by the book, followed every regulation, and dominated fairly. And now they were being punished for it. But Nissan wasn't going down without a fight. They showed up to the 1995 season with a redesigned GT-R that complied with the new regulations. They stripped out the Atessa system, removed the rear-wheel steering, neutered the turbo setup, destroked the engine to meet the 2.0-liter limit. What they had left was a shadow of the monster they'd created. The car they brought to the grid was called the GT-R LM. It looked like a GT-R, it had the same aggressive stance, the same menacing presence, but underneath, it was a compromise. A neutered version forced to play by the rules designed to kill it. The GT-R LM ran a handful of races in 1995 and 1996. And you know what? It was still competitive, even handicapped, even restricted, even stripped of everything that made it special, it still won races. At the Suzuka 1000 kilometer in 1995, the GT-R LM took victory. Engineers, drivers, and fans watching knew this wasn't the real GT-R. This was the ghost of Godzilla, and it was still haunting the competition. A few more wins followed, podiums, top 5 finishes, but the dominance was gone. The aura of invincibility had been legislated out of existence. Drivers who'd piloted the original R32 talked about the difference like war veterans remembering better days. The old car felt like it was reading your mind, one said. The new one just felt normal. Another described it as driving a lion that's had its teeth pulled. By the end of 1996, Nissan pulled out of Group A competition entirely. There was no point. The regulations had been rewritten specifically to kill their car. Racing in a series designed to exclude you isn't competition. It's a staged execution. Nissan released a statement thanking fans and reflecting on their success. What they didn't say, but everyone understood, was, "You didn't beat us, you banned us." And just like that, Godzilla was dead. Killed not by a better car, not by smarter engineers, not by faster drivers, but by bureaucrats with pens and rulebooks who couldn't handle getting beaten. The other manufacturers celebrated. Finally, they could race each other without getting embarrassed every weekend. Ford, BMW, and Holden returned to competitive racing. Close battles, last lap overtakes, the kind of racing fans supposedly wanted, but something felt hollow about it. Sure, the races were closer, but they were also less impressive. Lap records that the GT-R had set years earlier, still standing. The Bathurst victory margin, never matched. The GT-R wasn't just gone, it was irreplaceable. But here's the thing about killing a legend. You don't erase it, you make it immortal. So what do you do with a story like this? A car too fast, too advanced, too dominant. Banned not for breaking rules, but for breaking spirits. The R32 GT-R could have faded into history as just another racing car, another footnote in the record books. Instead, it became a myth. Because here's what the rule makers didn't understand. You can ban a car from racing, but you can't ban it from memory. The GT-R's reputation didn't die in 1995, it exploded. Street racers in Japan started hunting down R32s, not the race version, the road cars. Because if the race car could dominate professionals, imagine what the street version could do in the right hands. The legend spread like wildfire. America got its first taste through video games. Gran Turismo, Need for Speed, Midnight Club. Every racing game featured the R32, and every player who drove it had the same reaction. Wait, this thing is legal? Then came Fast and Furious. Paul Walker sliding in a silver R34 GT-R through the seats. Different generation, same DNA. The movies introduced millions of people to the GT-R legacy, and they all wanted one. Import laws in the US made GT-Rs nearly impossible to get. The 25-year rule meant you had to wait decades to legally bring one into the country. That just made them more desirable. Clean R32 GT-Rs were selling for double their original price, then triple, then quadruple. Today, a pristine low-mileage R32 GT-R can sell for over $150,000. A car that cost $50,000 new is now worth 3 times that. Not because it's rare, because it's Godzilla. And the legend keeps growing. In 2007, Nissan brought the GT-R back, the R35. No Skyline badge this time, just GT-R. A twin-turbo monster with 480 horsepower, all-wheel drive, and computers so advanced, it could launch harder than supercars costing 3 times as much. Journalists tested it and came back with the same stories their predecessors told in 1990. How is this legal? It shouldn't be this fast. Nothing can keep up with it. The R35 went on to dominate time attack competitions, set lap records, embarrass supercars. Porsche engineers allegedly tested the GT-R and refused to believe the lap times were real. They bought one themselves and tested it. The times were real. History was repeating itself. Nissan had done it again, built a car so good that people questioned whether it should exist. But this time, nobody tried to ban it, because they learned their lesson. You can't kill Godzilla, you can only make it angrier. The R32 GT-R didn't fail. It won so hard, they had to change the game. 29 races, 29 wins. Lap records that stood for decades. A legacy so powerful that 30 years still talk about it in hushed, reverent tones. Banned, not for cheating, not for being dangerous, but for being too damn good. And in the end, That's the greatest compliment any machine can receive. The racing world tried to forget the R32 GT-R, but the R32 GT-R won't let them. Because legends don't die. They just wait for the next generation to discover them. And when they do, they understand why everyone was so terrified. Godzilla isn't just a car, it's a warning. A reminder of what happens when engineering, ambition, and raw performance collide. You don't compete with it, you survive it. And if you're lucky, you get to tell the story.